Good morning, everybody. Welcome to class. I'm Dr. Steve Kroner, the instructor for this lecture section for Chem 1210 this semester. A few things before we get started. One, I generally do record lectures, so I take a screenshot of what's on like the middle screen throughout lectures. So if you miss class, highly encourage lecture attendance. I think it's really valuable to be here. I'm also aware that it's 8 a.m. and as the semester goes along, it's easy to miss an 8 a.m. class. A couple hours after class, you'll see a YouTube link appear. I have to upload these to YouTube, so it takes a little bit of time. A couple hours after class, you'll be able to find the lectures. You'll find them in Carmen to show a few features of Carmen that we use for the course. Modules. In fact, if you're looking for the lecture slides, you'll go to Modules and then look for the lecture videos page. And so in the lecture video page where I'll put the slides, so if you want to follow along with the notes in class, which I highly recommend. If you have a stylus, that's great, so you can take notes on your device, but of course you don't have to do that. There is a program this semester. If you don't have a device that has a stylus, you can get one through OSU. There's some information in the syllabus. We'll quickly take a scroll through the syllabus in a moment. And then once we have some lecture videos, they'll appear here. So back on that home page, and you guys have already found this link here, but this start of term task will take you to all the things you need to do at the start of the term. There's a variety of things you have to do. There is a separation of sort of lecture components and recitation components of the course. That's sort of what I'm setting up and what I take care of. There's a separate syllabus and a lab set of topics that you take care of. So I won't talk too much about the lab syllabus or any of the lab requirements, but just know that there's some requirements that go along with the lab part of the course. There's some announcements from the lab. Lab started meeting yesterday, so if you had the 3-hour lab session yesterday, you already met or should have met with your lab group. If you missed that session, check out the syllabus, the lab syllabus in particular. There's some contacts on what you need to do if you miss a lab. If you happen to have missed your recitation session yesterday, it wasn't a graded session. We went over an activity, just kind of an introductory activity to the course. You can find that in a module for recitations. Once we finish like a week, I'll post the keys for those recitation activities. You'll find contact information here. That's also available before you click the start of term tasks. But the big thing for getting set up this week is that online homework and e-textbook access. So you can go ahead whenever you can, click that link if you haven't already. And then there's a setting up your file in this document here, has a code in it that you enter. The payment for the online homework and e-textbook access is through your student account, so you don't have to actively pay for anything. You don't have to buy a code for this at the bookstore. So for the online homework and the e-text access for the class, it's something set up through Carmen and something called Carmen Books. It actually is a lot more affordable than the old days of buying a print textbook. So the access for 1210 and 1220 for the full year of general chemistry, I think is about $80 to $100, where of course a traditional textbook is $300 to $400. And so you can get that set up. The first assignment, we'll talk, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. I do have some notes to talk about some of the details of like homework policies, of when assignments start to be due. But the first online homework assignment is due after the weekend, so into Monday. So before Monday's class is when that first assignment is going to be due in terms of online homework. But we'll talk about some more aspects of online homework in a couple of moments. Like I mentioned, there's some aspects for lab here that you may want to read through too for your start of term tasks. Let me also show one thing on the main kind of home page is there's a contacts page. And I think that's where you'll find my office hours. For some reason, they stopped putting office hours on the syllabus. So you'll find my office hours here. I'm available other times. So if I have office hours not kind of right after class, I tend to have pretty low attendance, and oftentimes nobody attends. So if you do want to attend some other time, I can set up like a short appointment. I also am happy to answer short questions by email, or even long questions by email. So if there's something that you might be able to get answered by email, feel free. I try to respond as quick as possible to emails throughout this semester. I think the last thing I'll talk about the syllabus before just jumping into some of the slides I have prepared for today is just the syllabus itself and kind of scrolling through a few pages of it. It actually is quite long for a syllabus, and there also is a separate lab syllabus. I'll let, again, the lab and your lab TAs take care of reviewing the lab syllabus. But in terms of the lecture syllabus, here's some contact information for me. You also get the lab supervisor's contact info. If you ever try to email the lab supervisors, just know that you email like a Chem 1210 lab supervisor email, not any one of them in particular. So we have one email address set up that emails both of our lab supervisors as well as some assistant lab supervisors. So there's a ton of information in the syllabus. There's not a whole lot that I want to point out today other than just mentioning the textbook and online homework access is something that we have to set up. These are, in terms of the online homework, a required component of the course. Again, for examinations, you need to have some kind of device. So it could be any kind of laptop, it could be an iPad, it could be a Surface Pro. You just need some kind of technology of that variety to take your exams later in the course. And again, if you don't have such a device, you can get one through this loan program, the Student Technology Loan Program. Even if you have a device that you just don't like, and I think this is a free program. I don't know if they've thrown a price tag on it. If anybody does find out they're charging, let me know. Just I'm kind of curious to see if there's a little hidden charge if you do check out a device. But supposedly you can check out either an iPad or a Surface Pro for the semester. The calculator policy is kind of strict. It is kind of annoying in a way that we require 4 specific types of calculators, or 1 of 4 types of calculators for exams. So this isn't a problem for lab or for recitation. This is only in about a month when we take our first exam, and then midterms 2, 3, and the final. But specifically TI-30 of these 2 varieties, I think these are the only 2 varieties you can buy the TI-30 these days. And then anything that's a TI-30, TI-83 or 84 in terms of a graphing calculator. I know it seems annoying. I wish there were more calculators on the list. I'm sure there are a few of you guys, or probably a lot of you guys, who have a calculator very similar to these, but not specifically one of these. The only thing I can say is that we have exams take place where we have hundreds of students who need to start a test very quickly, and apparently it's easy for the TAs to have a shorter list of calculators to check before a test. But the TI-30s are usually available at Target, and they're usually like $10 to $15, so it's not a tremendous purchase. These 83s and 84s are very expensive, so I don't recommend just buying one of those just for the sake of our exams, especially if you already have a graphing calculator. And again, I just want to stress that there are a lot of calculators that are very similar to these that you would think we would allow you to use, but these are really only the 4 types that you'll be allowed to use during exams. I would not want anybody to show up at a test and not have a calculator that's suitable to take the test. I want to make sure that we're clear on that. And we'll give you some reminders of that policy as we go into midterm season a little bit later into the semester. There's some info describing lecture recitation. One thing that's interesting with recitation is just kind of describing what it is, because if you look at your schedule, you probably see that you have 2 like lab sessions of time. One's like a 3-hour block. That's your actual lab. That's where you go into a lab. Really interesting time. We're actually renovating our general chemistry labs kind of as we speak. So as you get into SLES, if you haven't been in there yet, you'll see some of the labs are actually undergoing a renovation project. And I think some of the labs are already done. So some of you guys might be in the newer labs that are pretty cool in their design. And some of you guys might be in the older labs that are kind of not cool in their design. What's really fascinating is that those labs, if you see the older style, they've been that way since this building opened in probably, I think 1986 is when this building opened. And I was an undergrad here in like 98 is when I started. And when I walked in the lab for the first time, I was like, whoa, these labs look really strange and not really inviting. The new labs look really inviting, or I think a much better design. So the recitation block, though, is the shorter. It shows up on your schedule as a lab block, but it's not a lab. It's in a classroom. The 55-minute quote-unquote lab session on your schedule is your recitation meeting. This is a chance for you to meet with a TA. Generally, we're going to go over activities just of problems just to get review on material throughout the class, just so you get some extra practice. Also with a TA who can show you how to solve problems, how to set them up, probably have you work in groups a little bit, and then go over some solutions to those problems. So that's the recitation session of the course. Exams, we do have 3 midterms and a final. The schedule, it's kind of funny. I think the most important thing you want to know is when are these midterms going to be is like on page 8 or 9 in the syllabus. So we'll get there in just a second. So some absence matters. If you have any absence for illness, COVID, faith issues, faith-related absences, you can read these sections here. If you do have faith-related absences, you're allowed up to 3 throughout the semester. You do have to submit those within 2 weeks. So take a look at that if that applies. Okay, I'm just trying to get to some of the more meat of the course. So the grade scale of the class, this is really important to kind of review in terms of how you earn credit in the course. The recitation component is 8% of the class, online homework's 10%, the 3 midterms 14% each, 20% final, and labs 20%. So lab is kind of like one of the 5 credit hours, so I think that's where we came up with the 20% for lab. The remaining part of the class is the other materials. You can see that midterms and the final are heavily weighted in terms of your grade in the class. These lights are incredibly frustrating today. The light switch apparently is on like a 5-minute delay if you hit a button on it, so you may see the lights change their dim level. And the front lights appear to not want to turn off today, so hopefully by Friday that'll be fixed. So I apologize for the lighting problems in the room today. But anyways, going back to the weighting in the class, 14 times 3 plus 20, so about 60, I think it's 62% of the class are examinations. Exams are, high stakes, environment where you're in a room, you have an hour and 15 minutes to take a test. Questions will come at you relatively quickly, so we have to get prepared for taking tests in that kind of setting, in that sort of assessment setting where you're probably going to have a few more questions on the test than you wanted to have, but we just got to get good at answering questions quickly and building the content knowledge in our minds to be able to solve those problems quickly. And hopefully I'll give you some strategies, we'll talk about a few of them today, on how to have success when we get to those exams. But at the same time, you do have opportunity to earn 10% relatively easily with the online homework. Again, we'll talk about the policies. I think it'll be a relatively stress-free environment for you to earn some points for the homework. Recitations are almost a show up, attend, participate, and you get the points. So recitations, pretty highly a participation set of points for that part of the course. Lab's tricky, you have to do a lot of work, but again, most of the students who do the work get a majority of the points and do well in the laboratory. So it's really kind of comes down to, let's get the points that are easy to get and not try to lose any of those, and then let's try to do as good as we can in the exams and get the best possible grade we can get in the course. In the old days, when I first started, when I was a student here, and then later when I started teaching, this is my 15th year teaching like Chemistry 1, the first sort of term of general chemistry here at OSU. We never had a grade scale before. We'd always did that thing that you may have heard about of grading on the curve, where the curve just set the C. And so it was always really painful telling a class, hey, we're going to do all these things to try to get your knowledge better than we did, say, last year, and then the average is still going to be a C. And then you just kind of shift the average. Maybe students do better that hit the average, but they don't get a better grade to represent their higher learning. Well, now we do have, finally, and last fall was actually the first time we had a solid grade scale in the class. I think this is obviously a thing a course should have, is a grade scale for you to check and see how you're doing throughout the course. Only thing that I'll try to convey here today is that exams are always a little on the lower averaging side, and everything else is usually on the higher averaging side. So when we get a lot of A's or A minuses, scores for our homework sets, our lab, and our recitation, we're just kind of keeping up with those scores. To really get our grade to stay in that range, we got to go get those examination points to do well in the exams. So exam averages in the course last year were probably in the 67 to 75% range for the 3 exams in the final. I don't think that has to be the average. I think we can do better every semester. I think there's better ways of motivating groups of students to learn, and so hopefully we can put those into place this semester and do even better. We do write different exams each semester, so sometimes the exam difficulty does shift a little bit. So, but at least at the end of the day, when you calculate your grade, you can kind of see where you fall on the grade scale. One thing that let's just leave it at that for the grade scale. So once we take exams, we'll talk about what the average was. We'll talk a little bit at the time about like what the course average is too, just to give you a sense of where your grade is relative to the course, to give you a sense of maybe where it is we need to apply some more pressure to do better. Like if you obviously do really well on everything, that'll be probably pretty apparent. But if you're in the above average mark, you may not want to stress too much. If we happen to be a little below average, we may just want to say, well, what learning strategies might we apply better as we head into the next exam in the class? In terms of the topics that we cover in 1210, I think we start from kind of basics of chemistry. We actually introduced the term chemistry, so I think that's obviously a pretty basic starting point. We talk about atoms, molecules, kind of compounds in chapter 1, and talk a little bit about measurement, significant figures. If you remember that boring topic, we'll nail that topic down in chapter 1. talk about some math aspects we need to know, and then get into chapter 2, we start getting into some chemistry where we actually start to look more discretely at the how we came to know things like the subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, how to come up with those counts for different elements, start to look at molecules, be able to name some different key classifications of compounds and ions. Getting into chapter 3, we look at chemical reactions in terms of stoichiometry, if you remember that word, for quantifying aspects of chemical reactions. How much yield do you get? How many grams of product you get from this many starting reactants. Chapter 4, we look at reactions in water, aqueous solution. So we look at properties of solutions, properties of acids and bases, get into some reactions and quantifying solution reaction stoichiometries towards the end of that chapter. Thermochemistry, the heat evolved or produced in a chemical reaction. So we look at heat changes associated with chemical reactions. I think we can think of chemical reactions that take place that produce heat, that make something hot. We can think of chemical reactions that take place that make something cold, like a cold pack has some sort of reaction that will take place that'll reduce the temperature of the object so it acts as a cooling device. So reactions can either give heat off or can absorb heat as they take place. We'll talk about those aspects in chapter 5. Electronic structure, electron properties, orbitals, if you remember some of those aspects. One thing, like at this point, as you're hearing some of these words, I hope that they're things that you recall learning. I don't think you need to remember those topics very clearly, but I think these are things that are part of high school chemistry class that most of you guys have probably seen before that we can build from this semester. I think it's always hard to start from scratch. Like if you were to have jumped into this class and not taken much science at all in high school, probably gonna be really challenging. But if you can kind of recall where some of these concepts build from and what you learned in the past, it's always a really good starting point. And so chapter 7, we look at some properties of the nucleus of the atom, some nuclear trends, periodic trends of the elements, and then we get into some bonding trends, molecular structure in chapters 8 and 9, and then we finish off with the discussion of gases, liquids, and solids to kind of wrap the semester up. And then when we finally get to chapter 12, we're just going to talk, probably not even a half a lecture on some of the aspects of chapter 12. So just a brief little discussion of some topics in chapter 12 at the end of the semester. In terms of roughly when we're covering material, there's 2 ways you can kind of see where we're covering things. One, you can look in the schedule and the syllabus. Second place is there's reading assignments I set up in the online homework system. The reading assignments are not graded. Those are just assignments where you can kind of see what we're covering throughout the semester on a given day. So you can see more, chapter by chapter sections if you go to the reading assignments. And so this is our rough kind of layout. But the first midterm is coming up in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in the 5th week of the semester, Monday night, we're almost at the page of the syllabus that has the exam times and dates and all that information. But Monday night are our midterm nights for our 3 midterms. So the recitation schedule shown here, this is kind of showing that we just have an intro activity. The assignments marked with the number are the ones that have required attendance, or the ones where we take attendance, grade participation, and then you get a score in Carmen for those weeks. So starting next week, we have graded recitation sessions. So if you happen to miss this week, not the end of the world. There is some useful information that gets shared in recitation, so I think it is worth going to class if you have the option to go tomorrow. And hopefully you found it somewhat useful if you went yesterday. There are a couple ungraded sessions throughout the semester. If you notice, there's just a different number of Tuesday and Thursday meetings throughout the semester based on the fall break. We lose a Thursday, and then Thanksgiving break, we lose a Thursday as well. So the Tuesday sessions have a couple ungraded sessions. Your TA will still be at class. Some days we'll still have some activity prepared if you guys want to attend and go over something to have some productive use of that time, even though we won't grade attendance those days. Okay, and then finally the exams. To me, this would be on page 1 or 2 if I design the syllabus. But this is really, I think, where our focus is going to be is, getting to these midterms and being able to have success when we get there. Monday, September 18th, October 16th, November 13th. These are night exams outside of class time. The Some of you guys may be thinking already that you have a conflict, maybe you have a bio lab or a physics lab during these times. If you do have a course conflict, there's a makeup policy where you can take an alternate exam. Just click that link. There's also links through Carmen. If you're in Carmen, you can get to those pages where you can sign up to take the test at a different time. There's no penalty associated with that. You'll take the same test, et cetera. So if you do have a conflict, you can fill out that form. Relatively soon is better than waiting, but as soon as you can, try to get those exams put in. And I think if you have the same class, like you can submit all 3 of your makeup requests at once. And if you have other issues, you can read the makeup policy in terms of like what excuses are allowed to take an alternate time exam. If you do get sick, that's what we call a makeup exam, where you'll take the exam later at a different time, usually in a different week, usually at the end of the semester. So if you have to miss the test because of an urgent issue, because of a car accident right before the test, really sick before the test, then that becomes a makeup exam situation. But you can read that policy if and when that applies to you. Final exam is at a university scheduled time in a university scheduled location once it gets set. So it won't necessarily be in our lecture room. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't in our own lecture room, but it's Monday, December 11th, but in the morning. And so just know that 3 midterms night exams, and then the final is like our class in the morning. Okay. I don't think there's too much else in the syllabus I want to mention. There's a lot of information if you want to read it. I guess it might be worth just saying out loud that, try not to cheat in the class. The one really obvious thing I want to make sure everybody knows is Turnitin gets used on the written report stuff. So Turnitin can be used to find if you copy and paste from other people's reports. Not something I think that comes up a lot, but I think it's something that's always good to know would happen. On exams, whatever, just, the usual, just do your own work, be prepared, and then we'll have great success. So you can read through some of this. There is an academic misconduct quiz that you take, so reading through this page and then taking that quiz is going to be useful, and that is linked in that start of semester tasks. Okay, so with that, I'm going to transition to the slides, and a lot of the things I have slides to talk about I've already talked about, so I might go relatively quickly through some of these slides. But so we talked about how to set up our online e-text access and the start of term tasks. We talked about how to get these lecture slides, so it's just in modules. One other thing, I guess, before I get off of not clicking on Carmen too much, is over in modules, I want to show one other thing, is there's a page for daily quizzes. I'm not sure why they put this under recitation, but this is really for the entire part of the course. But this daily quizzes, practice exams for practice, this is a set of quizzes I prepared a couple semesters ago to take along with the course as you go. So one of the best ways to learn, and again, there's a slide, I'm getting ahead of myself, but one of the best ways to learn is by practicing the recall of information and practicing the recall of content and practicing recalling how to solve a problem. And so sometimes if we just practice with the book open, with our notes open, and looking up how to do problems, we don't really learn how to do them without those study aids available, like when we're at a test. And so to give you good practice, there's all these practice quizzes where you can just click, and these are all PDF quizzes you can take on your own, not a graded part of the course, but where you can just go. Most of them end up being multiple choice. This one has some short answer questions, but most of them end up being multiple choice where we give you the key, you can check against that key relatively quickly. And then a bunch of the quizzes have video solutions too that are posted through YouTube, so you can watch a video solution to a lot of the quizzes as well. And eventually, presumably, that quiz will load. But so a bunch of PDF quizzes, you can take them as often as you want. They're kind of like dated, so you can kind of see roughly where in the class you might want to try to take a quiz. So they kind of start next Monday once we get into some content where you might start taking one quiz a day, every other day, and those quizzes kind of keep up with the material. And they get a little bit review, so as we go along, I'll be reviewing some topics so you get a chance to have, a week after you see something, another chance to solve problems on those topics. So just a variety of quizzes that you can take, again, mostly multiple choice, so you can get some quick feedback, check against the key, watch solutions if you need to. But the key for this would be, this gives you a chance, as you go throughout the course to be doing practice so that we're not getting to the point where we're 2 nights from the midterm trying to take a bunch of practice exams, which honestly happens a lot. I think it's very common to get to the point of that first midterm and have to try to learn all the content really quickly, or feel like you had learned it but realize you hadn't really learned it in a way that allows you to solve the problems without your notes open. That's what really becomes the hard part, is closing the notes and being able to take an exam without them available to help. Okay, so again, labs and recitations are meeting this week, and if you missed lab, make sure to read that lab syllabus. So the office hours, again, no appointment needed to come to office hours. So my office hours, and we have a learning resource center and 170 Celeste over in Celeste Lab on the first floor, kind of where you get your lab coat from in that back hallway there. That's where all the TAs in general chemistry will be holding their office hours. And you can go see any TA whenever that room's open. It's going to be open from about 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. I think even some evening hours, because we have such a large number of TAs in the autumn semester. But a schedule will post once we get all those scheduled. So like starting next week, that becomes a really good place to go get help. If you have a question on a lab report, if you have a question on a homework problem, if you're just stuck, anytime during like pretty much business hours, you can go find a TA who can help you. You don't have to just go to your TA. In fact, you're encouraged to go to any of the TAs in the room. And likewise, anytime my office hours are open, feel free to drop by and ask whatever questions that you need help with. And like I said, email me if you have other questions. If you want to meet outside of my office hours, just send me an email and we'll get something set up. Okay, online homework. Let's talk a little bit about some of the fine-tuned details for the online homework. So the first required assignment is due, like I said, Monday morning, 8 a.m. There are a couple of like practice assignments that I set up that you can do. So just know that when you look at Monday's assignments, you're going to see a couple practice assignments, and you're going to see the pre-lecture 3. So Monday's lecture 3, you're going to see that pre-lecture 3 assignment. So these assignments generally due before lecture, mostly covering the previous lecture, or once we get a couple lectures in, previous lectures. So you might see some review problems as you go along. You get unlimited attempts, 3% off per wrong answer. But then if it's a multiple choice question, say it's 4 choices, it would be 25% off per attempt. Now, one kind of downside is most of the questions you're going to see this semester are multiple choice, because most of your exam questions are going to be multiple choice. And these questions you're going to come across are mostly derived from textbook problems. Like if you go to the textbook reading and you're reading like chapter 1, you're going to come to those practice, like in-chapter practice examples, and they always are followed up with like a question that's multiple choice. If you're in the textbook in the reading mode, where you're like reading the textbook, you can answer the question, see the answer, but unfortunately there's no way for me to like tie that question in that spot into the homework system. But what I can do is take that question, put it onto an online homework system where you go into the Mastering Chemistry, click the assignment, that same question is there, and with the same answer. And so now I'm not telling you a simple way to do your homework is to go see what the answer is in the reading and then just go put it in the online homework, but I'm trying to show that if you do the reading, understand the problem, you're going to get a chance to repeat that problem later and get credit for doing that problem on that later step. So it's like you get a chance to practice it in the reading, you get a chance to then go get the credit for it on the homework system. So I think the way I want to encourage the use of homework this semester is through reading first. So if you take the time to do some reading, and then even if your reading is, I'm going to go to the problem, I'm going to go back and see the reading to understand the problem, that's better than not reading anything at all. So let's try to look at those problems in the textbook that are multiple choice in nature, and some of the practice examples that come before that are a major basis for the questions you're going to see in the online homework. So as I mentioned, the due date for like the first assignment would be Monday, 8 a.m. So let's say it's 10 questions. Well, let's say 9 of them you figure out, and then there's one of them that you're kind of stuck on, and you're not sure if you should hit enter on the answer or just wait to ask a question. If you want to wait, it's not that big of a penalty. It's a 1% penalty per hour late, just on whatever questions you answer after the deadline. Once you start doing Mastering Chemistry, you'll see that if you answer a question, it'll like almost like live update the gradebook in Mastering Chemistry with that score. That gradebook doesn't exactly sync to Carmen's gradebook. Carmen's gradebook's a whole different story. But when you're Mastering Chemistry, you'll see there's a gradebook. As you're answering questions, you're getting your points. So on a homework set, you don't ever have to hit submit once you finish it. Sometimes that's a question. When you get to the last question, you might be looking for, is there a submit button? There's not. Every time you answer a question, it's like live grading that question, giving you the points you earned at that time. So if you are late on like one question, the late penalty only applies to that one question. And so you can always come to class, ask a question, go home, and know you're only going to get, like a 1 or 2% penalty for being an hour or two late after the fact. If any situations arise, we have to extend deadlines. If you get really sick, if you're in the hospital or something like that, family emergencies. If you need something bumped for some good reason, let me know. We can always extend deadlines if we have to for particular students in situations that call for it. One other thing to note on the late penalty is it maxes out at 60% off. So if you just forgot about an assignment, let's say you get into 2 weeks from now, you didn't realize Monday had an assignment, you can still get 40% of the points after the fact, so long as you do it at some point throughout the semester. So 1% off per hour late, maxed at 60% off. So these assignments aren't going to take too long. I mean, especially if you've done some reading, you kind of understand the problems, you've been to class, you kind of get where they're coming from. They're not going to be super duper hard in nature. If you feel that you are seeing hard problems, let me know. Maybe there's a problem I didn't anticipate being challenging on the homework. So if you do see something where you think I'm crazy, where a particular homework set or problem was hard, let me know. I'll take a look. I can always delete a problem if it was too hard. There's a lot of things I can do if there's good reason to. But last semester, most of these problems, I don't think they were very challenging. They don't take a lot of time to solve because, again, multiple choice, not a huge number of problems, but it's really designed to try to keep you up with the reading in the class. One thing that's easy to do, though, is just to do the problems and try to figure out the answers without doing the reading or figuring out the problems. That might get you a good homework score, but again, most of the points are earned at the exam. So we have to kind of think, is the way we're doing our homework productive towards getting a good exam score later? I think probably the easiest way to approach homework is to do the reading, see the problems, and then kind of close the book and redo the problems and see how well you can do them without any study materials available. And then if you want to really challenge yourself, go take the daily quiz for that day or around the time that we are in the semester and see how well you do on that quiz again. I would take it, no notes, no study materials, just an equation sheet, which is given on that daily page. If you go to that daily quiz page, there's like a little equation sheet like you would get on the real test, and just use like that, your calculator in the quiz, and see how well you do. Help you get feedback, help you see what topics you might need to revisit in the reading. So yeah, the homework should follow pretty close along with the reading and practice exercises. There's also something towards the end of the chapter called exam prep questions. You'll see those appearing on some of the quizzes too, but those are also questions you can do in the book, practice before you get to them in the homework if you wish. So like I was saying, there are two practice mastering assignments that are marked as being quote unquote due on Monday. They're not required for credit, so you don't really have to do them if you don't want to. One is a chemistry review. If you're going to do just one of them, I would recommend doing the chemistry review one just because it'll take you through some of the review topics in the class. And then the second one is like an introduction to using mastering chemistry. I'm sure you can appreciate that every online tool has a bunch of nuances with using it. Since most of our questions are multiple choice, we're not going to use a lot of the weird features of mastering chemistry. It is funny, the worst question that you can ever ask in mastering chemistry is where you know how you have to write out a reaction of like NaCl, like AQ plus this. Those questions are so nuanced in terms of how the system grades them. Like you'll enter it correctly, but have something reversed or some symbol not quite the way it wanted it. You've probably seen these things online where the answer is exactly what it should be, and it says wrong, and it says the answer should have been exactly what you wrote. So those things come up all the time with some trickier questions, but luckily I don't ask those, so you don't have to worry too much about that. Before exams, you'll see something in mastering called dynamic study modules or like chapter review like problems. Those are for practice also. Those you may find useful. There are some questions in those packets that aren't very useful, and that's why I don't require these for credit and make them assign points, is if you look at some of those problems, it'll have 30 questions and like 5 of them won't be very good, and you'll want to argue about removing those questions in the packet. It's very hard to remove questions from those assignments, but they do mostly have good problems that you can look at and use to study before an exam if you want to use those assignments. So look for the dynamic study modules, and then also the reading assignments. The reading assignments, again, not graded, but they'll help you keep up with what sections we're covering on a given day. They'll help link you to those sections in the book, help link you to those sort of questions that are being pulled into those online homework problems. Now, how should you study? Quote unquote study. And study is a weird thing. I mean, like is reading the book studying. Some students don't think that's studying. Some students only think looking at like a practice problem and attempting it is studying. I think whatever you call studying, like I think if we start from reading and trying to understand concepts is the basic idea. And like if we remember a lot of these concepts from high school, then maybe you don't need to do as heavy reading on those topics. I think everybody's going to find something we talk about this semester to be really memorable from high school that they don't have to do a whole lot of work to recall and to learn. But then you're going to probably find some concepts that are a little newer, maybe not as fresh in your mind, maybe go a little deeper than you saw in high school, that you are going to have to do some of that heavier lifting, that heavier work. So I think trying to stay caught up with lecture. So if you happen to not come to lecture every day, try to keep up with the videos. I mean, you can speed the time up to and have a lecture take place in less than 55 minutes if you want. You can repeat things. So I understand watching a lecture video can be useful, but just trying to make sure you keep up with the class if you're going to choose to not attend class every day, so that we're not trying to watch all the lectures like the week before a midterm. Let's follow those reading assignments and the reading in the textbooks, especially on the topics that are harder to us as we go throughout the semester. As you read, again, those self-assessment questions, exam prep questions are going to be the basis for your homework. They're going to be the basis for the framework of the understanding I think you need to have to do well on the exams in the class. After kind of reading, preparing a little bit, I think that's when you might look at those pre-lecture assignments and then to take those assignments before lectures throughout the course. And then those daily quizzes, I think that's going to be your best chance to get feedback and to get practice and to really start to get good at taking like a quiz or a test without our study materials available, with questions that are designed to kind of look like exam questions in a relatively short and simple format of like 5 to 10 questions per quiz. And then repeat this cycle. If you're just every day doing a little reading, a little problem solving, and kind of building from what you know, every day, I think you'll find that come midterms, you're not, quote unquote, studying a whole lot right before the midterm. I think the more studying you do before the midterm is what cramming, right? So again, this just mentioned those daily quizzes, already talked about that. There's over 70 of those available throughout the semester to help you learn. I took a lot of the ideas of designing those quizzes from this book called Make It Stick. I highly recommend this book, especially for like the pre-med audience or the pre-professional audience, because if you look at this book, it uses a lot of examples from like cognitive, behavioral psychology as its basis for some recommendations on how to study. And it goes into some really like interesting examples of students preparing for the MCAT. And it's really easy to read too. It's like written by like cognitive scientists and like an actual like writer who's pretty good at telling stories. So if you have a desire to do really well on exams like MCAT exams, chemistry exams, check this book out if you have the ability to do so. So again, we already kind of talked about the exam being a heavy weight of the course and needing to get good at doing problems the first time we see them. And that's really, in a nutshell, what makes a midterm hard is you're probably going to see a problem that's not worded exactly like a problem you've seen before, but it is a very similar problem in nature and uses the same content and the same knowledge, the same problem-solving skills that hopefully we've built, and that would be recognizable if we've had a lot of practice before that moment in time. So lab, make sure to look for the lab announcements. Make sure to know that there's a separate lab syllabus. So check that out when you have lab questions. If you do have to email the lab supervisors with questions, again, there's actually like a little part of their announcement where they want to know like what section you're in, what time you meet, and that information. So even look at that information in one of their announcements on how to email them if you do have to send your lab supervisors an email. Okay, I already reviewed Carmen. Again, I just want to reiterate this room in Celeste Lab is a great location to get help throughout the semester. Again, no appointments needed, open Monday to Friday, really easy place. There's also a thing called the Dentist Learning Center. If you realize in this class or any of your other classes that you're struggling to learn some of the things that are being presented, they have, there's a Dentist Learning Center OSU that has learning specialists that will give you different strategies that maybe go beyond what I was talking about here today. So if you feel like you need some help with your studying, that's a great place to get some help. Okay, so if you're unsure about anything, checking the syllabus is a great first place to see if there's something in the syllabus about one of your questions. You can check Carmen, see if there's an announcement about something. Then you can email us. I don't mind getting a lot of emails about questions, especially early in the semester. This semester, I really haven't gotten that many emails, to be honest, before the semester. Sometimes I get a ton of emails, and this semester it's been relatively quiet. So if you do have questions, don't hesitate to ask. I'm happy to answer those questions. In Carmen, I won't go click on it, but there's a student resources section on that main page. It has a lot of links to different resources at Ohio State. Okay, so I didn't want to get too much of an intro to chemistry other than being able to do a kind of little demo and tie it into some different topics of the class. Before talking a little bit about the material, I've done a lot of talking, haven't really even introduced myself. I want to get a chance for us to introduce ourselves to each other too. But like I said, I'm Dr. Steve Kroner. I was in your seat at one point, did my undergrad here at OSU, went to Cornell for grad school. Here at OSU, I run the physical chemistry teaching lab. That's a course taken by chem majors in their junior and senior year. I lecture 1 or 2 general chemistry courses a year, often in the fall is when I teach one of them. And so I really like teaching the fall Chem 1210 because we get mostly new students and students who are just heading towards like med school and a lot of really cool careers. So how many of you guys are freshman students, like new students to OSU as well? So most of you guys, where are returning students, returning champs? All right, welcome back, guys. And then I'm originally from Ohio, originally from the Youngstown, Ohio area. I always like to ask, who's from anywhere near Youngstown? Anybody? Oh, that's a few. That's like 2 more than normal. Normally there's like 1 or 2 hands, like, I don't know if I should raise my hand. I'm from Hubbard specifically, for anybody that's heard of that place. Anybody from Hubbard? I've had like 3 students in my life here from my hometown, maybe 4. But so that's where I'm from. So where are you guys from? How many of you guys are from Ohio? You can go around. Let's do this thing where let's take like a 3-minute pause for us to share with our neighbors, kind of like talk with each other about where you're from, maybe what dorm you live in, what other classes you're taking, that sort of thing. So let's take a 3-minute pause so you guys can meet each other. Let's bring it back in. So we'll come back in. So what did we learn? So I'm curious now to find out where all you guys are kind of from. So like who's a pre-professional, pre-med, pre-dental, pre-something? Large portion. Who's like a tech, some sort of, I don't know, that's not a good one. Biological science majors that are hoping to go to grad school, maybe just grad school in general, who wants to do that sort of thing. Yeah, anybody want to be a teacher of some variety? We don't get a lot of hands up for that. I really think we need great teachers. So if ever you're thinking, what else could I do with my biology degree or whatever your major is, we need good K-12 teachers. I think you guys can probably think back to your experiences in school and probably remember good and bad teachers you've had and how much better it is to have a great teacher inspire you in K-12. So just know that's always a good career option that maybe people don't think off the bat in a class like this. But anyways, so, and how many of you guys are from, I don't know, somewhere else in the US other than Ohio? We're international students. That's awesome. I mean, I think we get a great chance in lecture to meet each other, talk with each other throughout class. You know, I like to give problems for you guys to work on in class, not like exclusively, maybe one or two a class where you get a chance to work with your neighbors, get a chance to get to know each other, get a chance to really have the benefit of being in a room with your classmates where you can easily turn to each other and have a quick conversation. And I think we just had like so many conversations that happened in 3 minutes. That was really awesome to see. Okay, so I think we all kind of know the idea of chemistry is the study of matter and the studies of the reactions and the properties of matter. So I think the definition of chemistry is pretty straightforward, and we've probably seen it a billion times. One thing that I think maybe we see a little in 1210 and 1220 that you don't see a whole lot in high school, or maybe don't develop unless you're in like an AP class, is that molecular level, really getting a good picture of what molecules kind of are structured to look like. We get that when we get into chapters 8 and 9 in the class, and you see some aspects as you continue. You get into OChem. I mean, it's all about visualizing molecules in three-dimensional shapes, kind of is a big part of organic chemistry. So getting that molecular picture is a big part of chemistry that we'll start to see, and even start to look at some different structures and things even in as early as chapter 2 in the class. And so then why do we study chemistry? Well, predominantly because somebody told you it's a prerequisite for the next class you had to take, right? So like you got to take OChem, and you don't have to take OChem because med school tells you have to take it. But I think obviously we need to understand the structures of molecules if we're going to be assigning drugs to people. That's probably a good thing to have some good understanding of, and the basic structure and properties and shapes and functions of compounds. And so I think that's a good reason to go through general chemistry and organic chemistry. There's also reason to solve problems of energy through designing better materials, for biochemistry to understand either how systems work or how to fix broken systems through studying biochemistry. Food chemistry, there's a lot of additives or things that preserve food that come from a sort of food chemistry starting point. So a lot of good reasons to learn chemistry. Now, what I wanted to do today was get a start on a chemical reaction. So why not see a chemical reaction in a chemistry class on the first day? And why not see one of the coolest reactions to kind of see in person? What's really funny is it's really good if the lights are off. It may take a while for them to actually turn off. So I'm going to go hit that switch now. Maybe, oh, now it turns off quickly. So, and then these lights for some reason aren't turning off. So the switch is broken on those. So unfortunately, we're not going to see the fireball as cool as it is in a completely dark room. So this reaction here is just hydrogen and oxygen reacting together to form water. Now, sometimes you may think, well, that's a nice looking reaction. Why would that be one I'm going to have to cuff my ears? I'm going to put safety glasses on. I don't quite understand why it's supposed to be. Like, I don't know why I have to wear safety glasses, but I get a cool fire extinguisher here. So what we're going to do is take a look at this reaction here. A little closer back. Let's see if we can't catch that on fire. And so, again, I'm going to wear hearing protection because I can't cuff my ears and light the balloon at the same time. So what we have to do is use actually the palms of our hands. It's pretty loud. We don't use the fingers that we don't use this. We use the palms. And you can use up and I'm going to get this inlet. But I'll give a reminder of when to light. Everybody, I've seen people doing this. They're trying to record with one hand and cuff one ear with the other hand. If somebody down front wants to set up something to record that they don't have to hold on to, I can give a minute, then we can get a video. And if you send it to me, I'll put it up on the course page. We'll do that in a second. Put it out too. I'm like looking for the lights off too. Okay. Okay, so now when I go in, this is when you get your ears cuffed. So now, you probably could have figured that would happen. Otherwise, we would have been telling you to cuff your ears. I would have been wearing the hearing protection. But that reaction, though, is, well, one, it's a really useful reaction because the reaction of hydrogen as a fuel source to produce water would be a cleaner source of energy than, say, combusting hydrocarbons. And it is the main reaction behind the idea of, like, most fuel cells kind of operate around the idea of using hydrogen or a source of hydrogen as the fuel source. Well, at first glance, you would say, well, I don't want that to happen in my car, right? Well, you can find examples of blowing up and cars blowing up from their gasoline burning. So one, you're not free from that happening with a internal combustion engine using gasoline as its fuel either. But most of our fuel sources would have hydrogen separate from the oxygen. We need them together to actually produce this reaction with that level of flame and explosiveness. And the other thing that we see going on here is we see the production of energy. We see energy given off. That's the heat we saw. So the reaction you see here, delta H, this is a topic of chapter 5. You may have seen it before, but that's like the heat change of the reaction. So the reaction lost heat. That's why it's negative. The reaction loses heat. Where did the heat go? Went to the room. So we're already kind of seeing an example we'll talk about more in chapter 5 about how heat flow kind of works. So if something is losing heat, it has to go somewhere, and it goes to the surroundings. It went into that fireball. It would have went into heating up anything close to that fireball when that fireball took place. We also see, like, the reaction itself. We talk about chemical reactions, subscripts, superscripts, how to balance reactions, how to quantify aspects of chemical reactions in chapter 3. We start talking as early as the next slide on the difference between, like, an element, a molecule, a compound. And so H2 is an elemental hydrogen. It's the elemental form of hydrogen, where hydrogen exists as a diatomic molecule. So hydrogen exists as two H atoms bonded together. We'll talk later about the covalent bond. That's like chapter 8 material, so we get into the bonding between atoms and how we classify those in chapter 8. Oxygen has a double bond, if you remember. O2 forms a double bond, where is the molecule O2 is the elemental form, the most stable form of oxygen at room temperature is gaseous oxygen. So we'll talk a little bit about how we have hydrogen, helium, lithium, all these different elements, but then they all have a different sort of most stable form. Some elements are gases at room temperature, some are liquids. There's actually only 2 liquid elements at room temperature. Does anybody know them? Quickly. Mercury is one of them, and bromine's the other. So bromine's the other liquid at room temperature. It turns out cesium and one I'm forgetting are awfully close. They have melting points just above room temperature. So if room temperature were a little warmer, we would have a couple more elements that were liquid at room temperature. Some, as we're seeing, elements exist as diatomic molecules, as gases like H2, O2, N2 does as well. The halogens tend to exist, Cl2, F2, etc., in their elemental form. And I'm not telling you all these examples right now so you memorize them or you're quickly writing all this down, but these are topics we're going to get into throughout the course. And of course, water is an example of a compound where H2 and O2 aren't compounds, they're molecules, or they are molecules of just one element. A compound is where we have 2 elements present. So a compound is something like water, something where we have at least 2 elements present together in some ratio, in this case 2 hydrogens to 1 oxygen. And we call water a molecular compound because it's a compound that's made up of molecules. That kind of differentiates water from something like NaCl, where NaCl is not like water, where water is like one distinct molecule, and you might have a bunch of them tumbling around each other in a liquid water sample. NaCl, you'd have a bunch of plus minus, like ionic attractions between the ions. So something like NaCl we call an ionic compound. So we talk a lot about the difference between molecular and ionic compounds when we get into chapter 4. So this one reaction kind of sets the stage for a lot of things we talk about in the class, introduces us to how we classify some different types of materials. It shows us an example where heat's being given off so we can kind of see what that looks like in this case, and hopefully gets us ready for a fun semester. Again, I don't know why the lights aren't on. Here they go, in perfect time. Okay, guys, that's it for today. We'll continue into some notes on chapter 1 on Friday. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.